What's up, everybody? So today we're gonna be working on this super cool guitar. My friend Ari, they dropped over their new but vintage Teisco. A lot of people know these as the Tulip guitars. The Teisco ET-200 is a 1960s Japanese made guitar, and it is super cool, super vibey. The frets are very low and super flat. I tested everything out. It needs all new electronics as well. We're gonna put a new trim system on. So it's getting the complete overhaul. Let's do it, let's jump in. All right, so there are a few things that you're gonna need when doing a fret job on any guitar. Things I like to use personally is a StewMac fret bar. Now this thing's amazing. This thing's great. I can put adhesive sandpaper that StewMac makes on here. They cut it to size, which is great. I've got about a 220, 250 up to 320 grit sandpapers here, and those are adhesives. They have had adhesive backs, so they stick right on here, and that's for leveling new frets. We're obviously going to need our frets. You're going to need your good old-fashioned painter's tape. We're also going to use a fret end file. Now this is for dressing the ends, just to get them all smooth and rounding them over, which is great. It doesn't tear up the fretboard because we've got a soft edge here on this side, which is awesome, and it's rounded. I also have a normal, just any small file that you can get pretty much anywhere. Get the file on one end, then I've taken 320 grit sandpaper on the other side, and so I have a softer end that I can use if I need to. We've also got a good old Sharpie, Phillips head screwdriver, and fret clippers, StewMac also. These things are amazing. I've had them for forever and they are fantastic. So when starting any sort of refret job, I always start by removing the strings from the guitar first. I loosen them, and then after they're loose, I can go through and clip them and remove them from the neck. The 0 fret, along with the other frets, had some serious wear. I don't know that this instrument has actually ever been refretted in over 50 years. And whenever you're doing this, it's always best to take your time and go slowly, just so you can avoid any chip out. So for most frets, I'll just say if they were seated properly. Actually, they weren't. If they weren't super glued down, it's way easier. If they were, you may need to use a soldering iron to heat up the fret a little bit so it melts a little bit of that glue and allow you to pop the fret out. Just come in here and get underneath it with your nippers like that and pop it up and just slide it along. Pop it and pop it. So before doing any sort of neck or fretwork, it's always a great idea to check your radius, just to double check and make sure exactly what the radius of the fretboard is. As you can see here, mine is 9.5 inch radius, and so that way I know exactly what size radius beam to use whenever I'm sanding. Usually when doing this, I'll use a higher grit sandpaper, so that way I'm not removing too much material. I'm just taking it back down to the bare wood. This also gives me a really good chance to polish out the fretboard, just to get a nice shine with a higher grit sanding pad. After that, I just made sure that my neck was straight by using a straight edge. I then went through and cleaned out any of my fret slots that had extra wood or gunk built up in them from over the years. Now you don't need any sort of special winder to really radius your fret wire. I use my fret nippers to do so, and this method works just fine for me. Since the fret slots that were already previously cut on the fretboard that you can see here did not go all the way to the end of the fretboard, I had to remove the tangs or cut part of the tang off of the outside of each fret. And this just basically hides it from the outside of the fretboard. I then seated the frets one by one, making sure that they were secure and seated properly. So you probably heard me talk about it before, but the whole point of putting super glue in the frets is to help the frets stay seated because sometimes, especially if you're refretting an old guitar and you decide on a different fret size that has like a different size tang or something like that, you're gonna want it to seat properly. This guitar, it doesn't have binding, but the fret ends were not, or the fret slots were not cut all the way out to the end of the fretboard. So the tang had to be, cut in or indented some, as you saw me doing earlier. It helps to put down a little bit of super glue, and you just feed it into the end of the fret, and it just finds its way down the groove, and then you clamp it. And if you get the really thin super glue, StewMac makes an awesome super glue. It sets within 30 seconds, and you can unclamp it and move on to the next one. And you just want to make sure that your frets are properly radiused with the fretboard, and or like fully down on the fretboard. Also, it keeps the frets from popping up over time, especially on the ends. As old wood does, it expands and contracts, or most wood expands and contracts over time, and the frets can pop up or out of place if they're not glued in. So yeah, there's different methods out there. People have different types of glues they like to use, different ways of doing it. This is the way I do it. Also, if you have a 0 fret, we're not going to remove any material on the 0 fret yet. This 0 fret is actually the same size as the other ones, but since I'm removing enough material from the other frets, it should be okay. If it's not, then I'm going to replace it with a taller fret, because the 0 fret acts almost as a nut. It takes the place of a nut. It's kind of weird. Yeah, we don't want to remove any material on the 0 fret yet. So what I do is I tape it and the nut off, so that way while I'm running the bar along the frets and leveling them, I don't accidentally clip or hit that 0 fret or the nut. All right, so also always important when you're doing fret work, tape off the pickups. Or in this case, I'm removing the whole pickguard. So typically after I have everything taped off, I'll take a bevel-edged fret file and bevel the edges of the frets, which just basically allows for me to take them in and angle them. Now I can't stress how handy an unused paintbrush is on a guitar. Highly recommend getting one for removing dust. After removing all of the dust created by the bevel, I mark off all of my frets individually with a Sharpie. Then I take my fret bar and just start to level out all the frets with a 220 grit. Alright, so next we're going to come up to the 12th fret, and then we're going to tape off the 12th fret. And what I mean by tape it is we're actually going to put pieces of tape over our 12th fret. Some guys like to go up a little bit further. I like to use the 12th because I feel like everything beyond that, it's kind of where the problems can lie, especially on these old guitars when this neck was had a little bit of a twist in it to begin with before I re-radiused it. But we just want to get some of that fall away in there, so when the strings are over it, it doesn't cause any issues. So I just did 2 pieces of tape over. You can do 2, 3, it just depends on whatever works for you. This is a 320 grit, and I'm going to put it on only a small bit of my block here. We're also going to remark these frets because we want to know how much we're removing and if it's even. So after I've leveled all of my frets and they're all flat, I can move on to crowning them. Crowning is basically a re-rounding of all of the frets, and how we do this is we're going to mark all of our frets again with a Sharpie. I like to use the StewMac Z file because it's specifically made to where it's really hard to mess up crowning the frets. It leaves you with a really nice fine line across the top, which is what we want. We don't want them to be completely rounded because that can just cause buzzing issues for us in the future. Alright, now that we have all of our frets leveled and dressed, we are going to fix up the fret ends. And you know how sometimes if you rub your hand along, if you're playing a guitar and you get that like sharp catching right there where the fret is, that's because the fret end hasn't been rounded over to meet the fretboard and or the side of the neck very well. So the way that we're going to do that is I've got this sweet little fret end file, and it's smooth on this end with a rounded end, and we just are basically gonna round over all of our fret ends, and then that way when you rub your hand across, it doesn't touch you. After I've rounded over all of my frets, I then take a 220 to 320 grit sanding pad and work my way up to about a 1200 grit sanding pad, just polishing out all of the frets. This is a great way to get them really nice and shiny. Little secret here, when taping up the fretboard to begin with, I always lay down a long strip alongside the edge of each side of the fretboard and then tape off each fret individually. It just makes removing it way quicker and easier. When I got to the tuners, I was tempted to replace them just because they were in such bad shape. They were so rusted out and weren't working properly at all. But none of them were bent, so I decided that I would try and refurbish them. I always try and refurbish old parts when I can. Next, I decided to take a wire wheel and a Dremel and remove all of the rust that way. This worked really well. It went really quickly and it was super easy. Also, things polished up quite nicely with this. I mean, check out the difference between the two tuner pegs. It's crazy how much that polished up. After removing all of the rust and grime from the tuners, I decided to take a buffing wheel and some StewMax swirl remover compound and just go out all the pieces with this, just polishing them all out. And this worked really well. I was able to get a really nice shine. These tuners were like new again. I didn't have to go out and buy new old stock tuners or any sort of cheap overseas replacement for them. And I was able to just reuse what I already had. Next, I used some Tri-Flow lubricant, just with the pin tip on it, which is really nice. This allows you to get into all the little crevices and just oiled everything up. Next, it was time to replace the tremolo on this. It was pretty rusted out and in bad shape, so I started by removing the whole trim system. As you can see, the chrome on it is pretty pitted. I knew that the new trim system that I got would not fit, so I used small poplar dowels, some wood glue to fill all of the old tremolo holes. This worked really well. I then went back after those had dried and clipped every single piece of that out, so that way I had a flat surface to work with. Up next, it was time to polish out the bridge. As you can see, the chrome on this was really pitted, but I knew I could bring it back to life with some polishing compound. Just basically using the same technique that I did for the tuning pegs, and this worked really well. So one thing about these old guitars is that a lot of them have neck shims, and what the shim does is it allows for there to be some pitch on the neck so that you can get the action closer when you have a higher bridge on the backside. Now StewMax makes really good replacements for these. I took a 5-degree shim and cut it down, drilled holes, and replaced it with that. That way the whole neck pocket would have something underneath it, not just the back, which can cause a lot of shifting as the instrument ages. Alright, everybody. So here I am at my makeshift workstation. I just got a new soldering iron because my old one, you'll notice, was falling apart. They didn't make tips for it anymore, unfortunately, which was a pain. So had to upgrade. Just went with another Weller because I like them. I'm gonna start out by tinning the tip of it, and then we're gonna solder in some new parts for this Teisco. So yeah. I've got a couple new pots for it. Originally it had a 500 and a 100 ohm pot. It also had two DP-DT switches, which stands for double pull, double throw. The closest thing I could get were these alpha pots. One's a 500K and then the other one's a 250, which isn't far off from the 100, so it should be fine. I've also got these. They don't make the single double pull, double throw on the back connectors anymore, so we're just doubling up here, and we got two, and I can just cross these and just solder the two together and it'll be fine. It's just a basic on-off switch for the pickup. Sweet, so replaced everything internally. It's gonna sound a million times better. Still kept the old pickups, both of them work, which is awesome. I tested them beforehand, so I knew that they were, actually got a reading on them, so they were working, but the electronics weren't. So I replaced both pots, and I also went ahead and replaced the DP-DT switches as well, so. Yeah. I then went ahead and installed the new trim system. I had to drill new holes for this. When you're doing this or putting screws into new holes, always remember to soap your screws before you put them in. This just helps the screws to go in a lot easier. I then soldered in my ground that was attached to my bridge. Alright, so what I'm doing now is I'm basically stringing everything up now that everything's pretty much done, except for the 0 fret. I'm going to string everything up and make sure that that's at the level that I want it to be, because the 0 fret actually acts as a nut on the guitar. The nut's just more of a placeholder, if you will. It's not what the string actually sits on. In this case, it's actually the 0 fret. So I've got to make sure that that's all good. Then I'm going to glue it in place, make sure to round over all the edges, make it look nice. I just want to make sure first that it's at the height that I want, that I'm not getting any buzz, don't need to make any more adjustments before I glue it in. The way I like to do this is to make sure I have enough slack in the guitar. I like to put the guitar through the tuning key, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my 5th fret, put my thumb down, and then pull the string up and give it enough slack in my hand to where I can actually pull the string up and into the palm of my hand. And that just ensures that I have enough slack to wrap around the tuning key, because we definitely need that. I'm gonna put the string through, pull out my slack. Remember that 5th fret with that thumb, pull it out. I'm gonna bend it around this way, like this, the opposite way. I'm gonna come down and under with it like that. Then I'm gonna pull and come over and push it down. And that, my friends, is how we're gonna lock it. That just locks the string, keeps it from slipping. That way I keep the tension, keep it tight, and ensures that the string goes on nicely. We can come through and clip this guy. Alright, so we're going to actually have to drill for some other pickguard screws, because this happened right here. I guess in the past sometime, the end broke off with the pickguard screw. And so what that means is this is going to lift up each time you unplug this, see? There's too much play in here, and we need to get this piece down. So if we screw it down, I would say probably right in here, we're gonna have way less chance of it popping out on us. That's probably what happened. It just got really old right here. So we may actually need to do 2, just to make sure that we're safe and solid right in here, because I don't want it popping out on them again. All right, so here I want to measure the action of my strings. I want to make sure everything is set up right. It feels a little low right now. So what I'm going to do is I want to make sure it's comfortable. I always use this string action gauge. All right, for this, you're going to need a capo and your finger, or one of your fingers, doesn't matter which one. We're going to capo on our first fret here. It's going to be a little funky with the 0 fret, so don't count the 0 fret as your first fret. It is your 0 fret, it's your nut. So we're gonna come to our first fret right here. And we're gonna be placing our finger on our last fret, just like this, all right? And usually I like to come to the center at 8th, 9th, 10th fret, around in there, center of the neck. The neck was pretty much completely straight before we put the strings on. There was a little relief in there. And I'm gonna look for about a 0.8, which, let's see, I'll turn it over here so you guys can see. So about at the 8th, we're looking for a 0.025 relief. And remember, we're gonna move up strings as we go. And these are looking good. I want to look at my 12th fret. Oh, take this guy off. Going for around 2 millimeters at my 12th fret on my bass string, on my E string. So we're going for 2 millimeters. Right here you can see we have 1, 2 millimeters at the 12th fret. We are at 1.5, so it'll come up to 2. I want to leave it there for now. I like that. And then for the treble side, we're gonna go for we want 1.6 millimeters at the 12th. So we're just gonna rest this on the frets. We're gonna look for 1.6. And as you can see right here, there's 1.5. We can come up. That's a little too high probably for me, but we're gonna check it. Now we're gonna come over to our first fret, and we're gonna look at 0.6 on the bass side. All right. I gotta do it from this side, guys, sorry. Okay, that's good. We're gonna look at 0.25 for the treble, and we are sitting at 0.25. Definitely get yourselves one of these string action gauges. It has all the conversions on the back. You can get them at StuMac. They're awesome. They're great. They're really, really helpful. This is a game changer. Get it. They're so cheap and they're so usable. You can set up all your guitars this way. They actually come with like instructions on how to use, measurements for every type of guitar, like acoustic and nylon string, basses, electric guitars, everything. All the measurements are already there for you, like as like a benchmark, so you can work off that. And just remember that it's all up to like personal feel. So what feels best for you? You know, even if you're getting some string buzz, doesn't matter if it's electric, you're not going to hear it plugged in most of the time, but it's up to you. Not everybody likes that. Some people like high action, some people like low action. Me personally, I'll take buzz because I like low action. So yeah, it's all personal preference, to each their own. Well, I just took a shower, so I got a wet head. That's why my hair is funky. I finished this guitar. It ended up being really, really awesome. It sounds amazing. I wired everything up, polished up the fretboard, oiled it. Yeah, so thought I'd take you through what it sounds like now.